The alarm clock didn't scream. It hummed a soft, rhythmic vibration at 5 a.m. that Eleanor Vance had internalized years ago. In the pre-dawn stillness of the sprawling glass and steel mansion, Eleanor was the only thing that moved with a pulse. To her husband, Richard, and her 24-year-old stepson, Julian, she was simply a part of the architecture as dependable as the heating system, and just as easy to ignore. Her morning was a choreographed ballet of domestic precision. First came the artisanal coffee, ground to the exact coarseness Richard preferred for his French press. Then came the sourdough, started 48 hours prior, slid into the oven so the scent of yeast and warmth would neutralize the sterile, cold smell of the marble countertops. She folded the laundry Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, smoothing out wrinkles with a practiced hand that never shook. By 7:30 a.m., the invisible labor was in full swing. She curated their lives. She replaced Julian's lost cufflinks. She scheduled the gardener. She navigated the complex dietary restrictions of the guests Richard invited over without notice, and she managed the household accounts with a terrifyingly efficient eye for detail. To anyone watching, Eleanor was the quintessential trophy wife who had traded her intellect for a quiet life of luxury. She wore silk robes and kept her hair in a soft, approachable bun. She smiled when spoken to and apologized for interruptions she didn't cause. She was the cushion that softened the sharp edges of their high-stress lives. Yet they treated her like the floor something. They walked on without ever looking down to see what it was made of. The friction came to a head on a Tuesday evening. Julian had invited 3 of his co-founders over to the house, young men in tech fleece vests, who spoke in buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and scalability. They were gathered in the formal dining room, maps of their projected growth spread out over the mahogany table Eleanor had polished just hours before. Eleanor entered quietly, carrying a tray of appetizers, Wagyu beef crostine with a balsamic reduction. She placed them down with the silent grace of a ghost. "Thanks, Ellie," Julian said, not looking up from his laptop. He reached for a snack without breaking his gaze from the screen. "And hey, we're running low on the sparkling water. The expensive stuff, not the domestic crap." One of his partners, a man named Marcus, with a predatory grin, looked Eleanor up and down. "Your stepmom's got a lot of free time, doesn't she, Jules? Must be nice to just exist. No KPIs, no burn rates, just picking out curtains all day." Julian let out a sharp, condescending laugh that cut through Eleanor like a serrated blade. "Don't get her started on curtains, Marcus. She spent 3 hours last week arguing with the designer about eggshell versus ivory. It's the highlight of her existence. When you don't have the brain for the big leagues, you focus on the small stuff. She's a boring housewife. It's a self-contained ecosystem of triviality." Eleanor paused, her hand still hovering over the tray. She felt the heat rise in her neck, but her face remained a mask of placid boredom. "Is there anything else you need, Julian?" she asked, her voice a calm, low melody. "Yeah," Julian smirked, turning to his friends to ensure they caught the punchline. "A bit of ambition would be nice, but I think that ship sailed when you married Dad. Just go make sure the wine is chilled for the 8 p.m. toast. We're discussing real money now. Millions. You wouldn't want to get confused by all the zeros." The young men laughed. Eleanor bowed her head slightly, a gesture they mistook for submission. "Of course, I wouldn't want to get confused." At 11:30 p.m., the house finally went dark. Richard was snoring, dreaming of his real estate empire, and Julian was likely in his wing of the house, staring at his failing spreadsheets and wondering why no one would fund his revolutionary app. Eleanor didn't sleep. She walked to the back of the walk-in closet in her dressing room. Behind a row of designer gowns she never actually liked stood a seamless panel. A biometric scanner, hidden behind a decorative molding, glowed blue as she pressed her thumb against it. The panel slid back to reveal a small, soundproofed room, the command center. Inside, there were no floral arrangements or eggshell-colored curtains. 3 massive monitors flickered to life, bathing Eleanor's face in a cold, blue light. The interface was a complex web of Bloomberg terminals, encrypted messaging apps, and deep-dive analytics. On the center screen, a logo sat in the corner, a minimalist stylized bird in flames. Phoenix Capital. Eleanor Vance, the boring housewife, sat down and adjusted her glasses. Her posture changed instantly. The softness left her shoulders, replaced by the rigid, predatory stillness of a grandmaster. She opened an encrypted email from the managing director of a top-tier Swiss bank. "Phoenix, The market is reacting to your move on the semiconductor short. We've cleared $42 million in the last 6 hours. What's the next play? Eleanor's fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, a sharp, percussive sound that was the true heartbeat of her life. She ignored the Swiss bank for a moment and pulled up a private folder labeled Project Reality Check. Inside were the leaked financials of Julian's startup. She saw the holes in his logic, the inflated user metrics, and the desperate burn rate. He was 3 weeks away from total insolvency. She also saw his formal request for funding, sent to Phoenix Capital's anonymous portal just an hour ago. In the memo, Julian had written, "We are looking for a visionary investor who understands high-level disruption, not someone bogged down by traditional slow-moving mindsets." Eleanor leaned back, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. She looked at the Wagyu beef stain on her silk sleeve, the mark of the servant he thought she was. "You wanted a visionary, Julian," she whispered to the empty high-tech room. "And you're right about one thing. I do focus on the small stuff, like the small clause I'm about to put in your contract." With a single keystroke, she authorized a preliminary interest email to be sent to Julian. She wouldn't just fund him, she would own him, and he would thank her for it. Never knowing that the boring woman who made his coffee was the same power that could unmake his world. The following week, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted from smug arrogance to a frantic, vibrating energy. Julian had received the automated interest ping from Phoenix Capital, and he was convinced he was the second coming of Silicon Valley royalty. He stopped wearing his tech fleece vests and started wearing Italian suits, strutting through the hallways like he already owned the city. "This is it, Dad," Eleanor overheard Julian saying during breakfast. He was waving a tablet in the air, ignoring the plate of perfectly poached eggs Eleanor had placed in front of him. "Phoenix Capital doesn't just invest, they king. If they get behind NexusStream, we're not just looking at a buyout. We're looking at an IPO that will make your real estate holdings look like a lemonade stand." Richard leaned back, sipping the coffee Eleanor had prepared. "And you're sure they're interested? I heard Phoenix is ruthless. They've dismantled companies for less than a missed quarterly report." "I can handle them," Julian scoffed, his eyes darting to Eleanor as she moved to refill his water. "It's about confidence. These big-tier investors smell weakness. That's why I don't let people like her near my business talk. You have to surround yourself with winners, not domestic help." With a ring on her finger, Eleanor didn't flinch. She simply adjusted the placement of the salt shaker by half an inch. In her mind, she was looking at Julian's burn rate. He was spending $15,000 a week on brand consulting and office perks for a product that didn't even have a stable beta. He wasn't building a company, he was building an ego. The big break quickly turned into a cold shower. By Thursday, the reality of the market began to bite. Julian's 3 other leads, the safe venture capital firms, had sent back stinging rejections. Eleanor, logged into her Phoenix portal, watched the industry chatter in real. Word was out. NexusStream was a hollow shell, and Julian was a liability. She sat in the living room, knitting a sweater she would never wear, appearing to be the picture of domestic dullness. In reality, she was listening to Julian's muffled shouts from the study. "What do you mean the valuation is too high? It's speculative growth," Julian yelled into his phone. "No, don't hang up. Look, we can adjust the equity." He emerged from the study an hour later, face pale and sweating. He looked at Eleanor, who was peacefully counting stitches. The sight of her tranquility seemed to enrage him. "Why are you just sitting there?" he snapped. "The world is moving, people are making moves, and you're just looping yarn. Do you even understand what it's like to have something on the line, to have a legacy to build? It sounds very stressful." "Julian," Eleanor said softly, her eyes never leaving her needles, "perhaps you should have a cup of chamomile. It helps with the nerves." "Chamomile," he repeated with a disgusted sneer. "That's your solution for everything. You have no idea that I'm one phone call away from losing the seed money Dad gave me. If Phoenix doesn't come through, I'm done." He didn't realize that the one phone call he was waiting for was currently sitting in the pocket of Eleanor's silk cardigan. Desperation makes people sloppy. In his rush to prepare a final pitch deck for the mysterious Phoenix, Julian began leaving sensitive documents scattered across the library. He treated the house like a trash can, assuming Eleanor was too simple to understand the numbers on the pages she was tidying. One afternoon, Eleanor found a stack of legal papers on the coffee table. They were his personal guarantees. documents that linked his own inheritance and his father's secondary properties to the business as collateral. It was a suicide mission. Julian was gambling the family's stability on a dream he hadn't even tested. As she stacked the papers, Julian walked in. He lunged forward, snatching them out of her hand. "Don't touch those," he barked. "I told you to stay in your lane, Ellie. These are legal documents. You probably think collateral is a type of laundry detergent. Just go back to the kitchen and make sure the silver is polished. We're having a guest tonight, and I need this house to look like it belongs to someone successful, even if the person running it is just a housewife. I was only trying to help." "Julian," she said, her voice small, a perfect imitation of a bruised ego. "The papers looked complicated." "Complicated for you," he corrected, pointedly, turning his back on her. "Go now." Eleanor walked away, her face downward, but as soon as she turned the corner into the hallway, her expression went cold. She had seen exactly what she needed. Julian hadn't just put his company on the line. He had signed over the very roof over their heads in a desperate, unread clause to his creditors. She went straight to her hidden office. It was time to send the official offer from Phoenix Capital. She drafted the email with surgical precision. She offered him $10 million more than he had ever dreamed of, but the small stuff he mocked her for was where she hid the hook. The contract included an immediate management takeover clause if the company missed a single milestone, and the first milestone was due in 30 days. She hit send. Seconds later, she heard a jubilant scream from the library. Julian was cheering, probably calling Marcus to tell him they were geniuses. Eleanor sat in the blue light of her monitors, her face a mask of iron. "You should have read the fine print, Julian," she whispered. "The housewife just bought your life." The following morning, Julian was a different man. He didn't just walk, he strutted. He treated the dining room like a stage, and Eleanor was his captive audience. He had received the formal term sheet from Phoenix Capital, and in his eyes, he had already won. "See this, Ellie," he bragged, waving a thick stack of papers near her face while she served his breakfast. "This is what $10 million looks like. This is Phoenix money." They saw the genius in Nexus Stream that you couldn't even fathom. Eleanor set down a bowl of chilled fruit with practiced stillness. "It seems like a lot of responsibility. Julian, did you have a lawyer look over the details?" Julian laughed, a sharp, patronizing sound. "I don't need a lawyer to tell me I'm winning. The terms are standard for a high-growth play. Besides, Phoenix is anonymous. They don't have time for petty buck. You sign, or you lose the opportunity. But I wouldn't expect the housewife to understand the move fast and break things mentality. You're more of a wait and see if the bread rises type." Eleanor watched him scribble his signature with a flourish. He didn't notice the performance-based equity seizure clause buried on page 42. Nor the immediate audit right that Phoenix reserved for any time, day or night. He was so blinded by the zeros in the bank account that he didn't see the cage door locking behind him. Once the funds were wired, Eleanor transitioned from passive observer to silent architect. From her hidden command center, she began to move the pieces on the board. As Phoenix, she didn't just give Julian money, she gave him enough rope to hang himself. She subtly influenced her network to dry up Julian's supply chain. She leaked anonymous industry tips that caused his potential partners to delay their contracts. In the house, she was the perfect, supportive stepmother. She made his favorite meals and listened to him rant about incompetent vendors and market volatility. "It's just a rough patch, Julian," she whispered, handing him a glass of scotch as he stared at his bleeding balance sheet. "I'm sure a big, important CEO like you can handle a few delays." "It's not just delays, Ellie," he snapped, slamming the glass down. "It's like the market is reacting to my every move before I even make it. It's like someone is inside my head." He had no idea she was actually inside his servers. She watched him waste $2 million on a marketing blitz that she knew would fail because she had already bought up the primary ad slots for a rival ghost company she controlled. Every dollar he spent was flowing, indirectly, back into her own accounts. Despite the internal hemorrhaging of his company, Julian's ego required a public display of success. He decided to host a Phoenix celebration gala at the mansion. He wanted to show the world and his father that he had arrived. He spent another $100,000 of the investment money on catering, ice sculptures, and a live orchestra. He treated Eleanor like a head waitress. "I want the staff in formal black and white," Julian barked at her 2 days before the event. "And stay out of the way, Ellie. This isn't one of your little book club meetings. These are the titans of the industry. If you have to be seen, just smile, hand out the champagne, and don't try to join the conversation. I don't want them thinking my house is run by someone who doesn't know the difference between a hedge fund and a hedge trimmer. The night of the gala, the house was filled with the elite of the city. Julian stood in the center of the foyer, holding a glass of crystal, bragging about his partnership with Phoenix Capital. The investor and I have a telepathic connection, Julian told a group of reporters. Phoenix knows disruption. They saw my vision when no one else did. We're changing the world. From the shadows of the kitchen, Eleanor watched him. She was dressed in a simple, high-necked black dress, elegant but unremarkable. To the guests, she was just the woman, ensuring the hors d'oeuvres were replenished. She felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. It was an automated alert from her system. Nexus Stream Cash Reserves, $0 Milestone 1, failed. The trap was set. The anonymous investor was about to stop being anonymous. The hangover of the gala had barely settled before the storm hit. At 8 a.m., Julian was jolted awake by a flurry of urgent notifications. The $10 million was gone, swallowed by a repayment trigger he hadn't noticed in the contract. By 9 a.m., a formal summons had arrived. The anonymous investor was invoking the immediate management takeover clause. The meeting was set for 11 a.m. in the glass-walled boardroom of the city's most prestigious legal firm. Julian was a mess. His tie was crooked, his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands were shaking as he rifled through his briefcase in the back of the car. "I don't understand, Dad," he stammered to Richard, who sat beside him looking grim. "They're seizing the assets. They're seizing the house. Who the hell is Phoenix?" "We're about to find out," Richard said, his voice tight. "And you'd better pray they're in a mood to negotiate, or we're both on the street." They arrived at the firm and were ushered into a room that overlooked the entire skyline. Julian paced the length of the mahogany table, rehearsing his excuses. "It was a market anomaly," he muttered. "A temporary liquidity crunch." The double doors at the end of the hall opened. Julian didn't even look up at first. Finally, "Look, we need to talk about the milestone timeline." He stopped. The clicking of heels on the marble floor was rhythmic, confident, and familiar. It wasn't a man in a power suit. It wasn't Marcus. It was Eleanor. But it wasn't the Eleanor who folded his laundry or apologized for the soup being too cold. Her hair, usually pinned back in a soft bun, was styled in a sharp, modern bob. She wore a bespoke charcoal suit that radiated authority. Her eyes, which Julian had always dismissed as vacant, were now as cold and sharp as industrial diamonds. Julian let out a nervous, confused laugh. "Ellie, what the hell are you doing here? Did you follow us? Did you bring my dry cleaning to the boardroom? Get out before the investor sees you." Eleanor didn't move. She walked to the head of the table, the seat reserved for the chairperson, and sat down. She placed the sleek encrypted tablet on the table and folded her hands. "Sit down, Julian," she said. Her voice wasn't the soft melody of the household. It was a low, resonant command that filled the room. "What is this, a joke?" Julian turned to the firm's senior partner, who was standing by the door. "Tell this woman to leave, Mr. Vance," the lawyer said solemnly. "I suggest you listen to Ms. Vance. She is the sole proprietor of Phoenix Capital. She is the anonymous investor you signed your life over to." The silence that followed was deafening. Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Eleanor, then at his father, then back to Eleanor. The boring housewife was staring at him with the detached interest of a scientist looking at a bug under a microscope. Julian finally choked out. "You're Phoenix, but you don't know anything. You spend your days choosing curtains." "I spent my days choosing curtains because it gave me the peace and quiet. I needed to manage a $4 billion portfolio without you interrupting me with your mediocrity," Eleanor said calmly. She tapped a key on her tablet, and the giant monitor behind her flickered to life, displaying Julian's private messages, his falsified metrics, and the predatory clauses he had signed. "You called me a boring housewife, Julian. You said I didn't have the brain for the big leagues. Yet, here we are. I own your patents. I own your office lease. And according to the personal guarantee you signed, the one you thought was too complicated for your father's secondary properties and your inheritance." She leaned forward, her shadow falling across his trembling hands. "The small stuff you mocked me for. It's what I used to bury you. Welcome to the big leagues." The boardroom felt smaller now, the air thick with Julian's panicked breathing. Richard, who had remained silent in his shock, finally found his voice. "Eleanor, honey, Surely we can work this out. This is a family matter. We can just cancel the seizure. Eleanor didn't even turn her head. She kept her gaze fixed on Julian, who looked as though he might be physically ill. This stopped being a family matter the moment Julian used our home as collateral for a lie, Eleanor said, her voice devoid of its usual domestic warmth. And Richard, don't honey me. You didn't marry a woman. You married a convenient solution to your household management problems. You liked the boring housewife because she didn't ask questions about where the money went. Well, I'm asking now. She slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany table. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an eviction notice for Julian and a restructuring plan for Richard's holdings. Julian, you are terminated. Effective immediately, she stated. The board, which is me, has found you guilty of gross negligence and the falsification of data. You'll be escorted from the Nexus Stream offices by security. Your personal accounts, which were tied to the Phoenix Bridge loan, have been frozen to cover the initial losses. You can't do this, Julian screamed, his face turning a blotchy purple. I'll tell everyone. I'll tell the press you're a fraud. The press. Eleanor raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow. The press is currently waiting in the lobby for a statement from the legendary Phoenix. Do you really think they'll side with the failed startup kid who got outsmarted by his own stepmother? You'd be the laughingstock of the industry before the 6 p.m. news. Julian collapsed back into his chair, the reality of his total displacement finally sinking in. Why, he whispered, if you had all this money, all this power, why stay? Why cook for us? Why let me say those things to you? Eleanor stood up, smoothing the front of her suit. The gesture was as precise as the way she used to smooth the bed sheets. Because I wanted to see if there was a shred of merit in you, she said. I gave you every opportunity to be a partner, to show respect, to lead with integrity, but you chose to use my invisibility as a footstool for your ego. You thought because I served you, I was beneath you. You forgot that the person who manages the foundation of a house is the only one who knows exactly how to make it crumble. She walked toward the door, then paused, looking back at them one last time. Being a housewife isn't boring, Julian. It's a masterclass in logistics, patience, and anticipating the moves of spoiled children. I just applied those same skills to the stock market. It turns out, billionaires are just as predictable as toddlers. Eleanor walked out of the boardroom and into the bright, frantic energy of the lobby. The paparazzi and financial journalists swarmed, their flashes creating a staccato of white light. For the first time in 10 years, Eleanor didn't shrink away. She didn't look for a kitchen to hide in, or a chore to complete. She spoke into the cluster of microphones with the calm authority of someone who had been in control all along. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am the founder of Phoenix Capital, and today, the era of invisible labor is over. By that evening, Julian was packing his bags in the guest house, having been barred from the main mansion. Richard sat in his darkened study, realizing that the woman he thought he had saved from a simple life was actually the one holding the keys to his empire. Eleanor sat in the back of a sleek black sedan, heading toward a private terminal. She pulled out her phone and sent one final message to her Swiss bankers. Liquidate the Nexus Stream assets. Reinvest the remains into a scholarship fund for women in tech. Call it the Housewife Initiative. As the car sped away from the Vance estate, Eleanor looked out the window at the city skyline. The sun was setting, painting the glass towers in shades of gold and fire. She didn't have to go home to cook dinner. She didn't have to check the wine or polish the silver. The Phoenix had risen, and she was finally flying home to a life that was entirely her own.